welcome. Take a seat, sit down, get comfy, because Blizzard has just announced a slew of changes coming in this reset. Changes to Mythic Plus, changes to Castle Nathria, changes to PvP, and then something else which I don't care about. Now, we have to start from dungeons, because I feel vindicated. I feel victorious. I feel like I made it, because Dealer Zayexa has gotten Arcane Lightning damage nerfed by 25%. This was one of my main complaints when talking about the other side in the nerfs that the other side received. They had gotten nerfs to Thrash, they had gotten some nerfs to bosses, from the damage to the last boss, Moezala, to the Mana Storm fight, but not Zayexa and Nakar, which were the two other tough bosses in the dungeon, a little bit overtuned. Hakar had the problem of the ads. It was this sort of a deceiving fight where people tended to kind of ignore the ads, and eventually the reason why they died was the ad damage, both of the ad auto attack damage and their Blood Nova. So Blizzard now addressed these bosses. 25% damage to the biggest and more dangerous part of Zayexa, which is the jumping dot, which has to be juggled between players. One of the more dangerous situations in Dealer Zayexa is that you go in with one tank and one melee DPS, and what happens is the Arcane Lightning goes on the melee DPS, and because Arcane Lightning jumps to the closest player, it would jump to the tank, and then jump to the melee DPS, and then jump to the tank, meaning they would keep stacking Arcane vulnerability on themselves, meaning eventually they would be taking 30% of their HP in a single tick of the dot and basically be unhealable and die. This is going to make this easier to manage, although it is still recommended for you to actually do this mechanic properly, rather than just ignore it because it does less damage. Akar, similar thing, massive nerf to the Sons of Akar, melee damage reduced by 50%, and then Blood Nova damage reduced by 20%. Of the other bosses and the other dungeons, there is an interesting nerf to Naltor, the Rhinebinder. Naltor the Rhinebinder is the last boss of Necrotic Wake. It is one of the more classic bosses, which at lower keys seems like he doesn't do anything. Seems like you're just killing him. But then the higher you go in keys, as you start getting in Tyrannical, you do start seeing what the problem is. When he puts up his shield and he starts to do AoE to everyone, and your healer is often impeded by the fact that he has to keep running, it becomes a little bit tough. This is a pretty big buff, though, to your DPSers, because Champion's Boon duration is increased to 30 seconds. It used to be 15. This is the buff you get once you complete the gauntlet and you go back up. So 30 seconds of 100% critical strike chance. That is rather massive. And then a couple of smaller nerfs. We have in Spires of Ascension, we have Ventunax, I guess slightly nerfed. Dark Stride duration has decreased to 15 seconds when it was 20. This was the more dangerous part for your healer and for your self-preservation as a player, as a DPS most of the time, together with the orbs. Given you were able to dance, given you were able to dodge the orbs, the other more dangerous part was when Ventunax would apply this dot to a player. It would put you in a situation pretty much always on Tyrannical, where a single hit from the orbs would also be a one-shot because you had this dot on you. The combination of this dot ticking plus getting hit by the sphere would mean a one-shot. Even without getting hit by the sphere, on Tyrannical this was hitting quite hard. It would require you most of the time, if you didn't want the healer to put complete attention to you every time, for yourself to use a defensive. Now it's going to last a little bit less. 20 seconds was a little bit too long. It got to the point where you could have two dots at the same time running. It became a little bit hectic. The last nerf is in Theater of Pain, Xav the Unfallen. This was something I noticed when doing Theater of Pain. This boss lasts for a long time. He has a pretty, I guess, interesting fight. You have to have the race of taking down the banner before he starts his old combo, because if he starts his old combo with the banner up, some slow-ass people are going to get killed. Now, this is going to happen less often because his health has been cut by 10%. Now, of all these nerfs, we also have a non-boss nerf, a general nerf, which is to the other side. The duration, the timer of the other side has increased from 41 minutes to 43. So, on top of the two bosses that basically skip the nerfs up to this point, Zayexa and Akar, now we also have a longer timer. Now, if you think about it, most of the other dungeons were put in line. Necrotic Wake, Sanguine Depths, of course, have received several nerfs. We have gotten Spires of Ascension's Thrash nerfed multiple times. We got Plaguefall, first nerfed in the Thrash weeks ago, and now nerfed in the bosses. Other dungeons that were already, on the easier side, like Calls of Atonement and Mists of Tirnasit, were already fine. So the only other dungeon that was left was the other side. After getting the nerf to their trash, they didn't get much of anything to their bosses. And with this change now, we have also the bosses nerfed in the other side with the addition of the timer. Now, I'm not sure if the timer change was needed, to be honest. Honestly, I think the boss nerfs was enough. But hey, I guess Blizzard has a reason for this. Now, after the dungeons, we also have some raid changes. What is interesting about the raid changes is that there is quite a lot of raid changes in normal, heroic, and LFR difficulty, and basically just one boss changed in Mythic. So for heroic, let's just call it heroic, Zymox, Sunken Salvation, Inerva, and Sludgefist were the target. Zymox has gotten the Glyph of Destruction and the Withering Touch damage reduced by 20%, up to 20%, because it scales, of course, with the size, since heroic, normal, and raid finder are basically flex mode. You can go in however many you want until the raid is full. Sunken Salvation has gotten basically the health of all the mobs in the fight, so all of the infusers, occultists, assassins, fiends, and the Vanquisher, the guy, health reduced by 10%. Then you have Inerva. Inerva Darkvein now is going to throw fewer battles for smaller raid side. Previously it was 2 to 3 in normal, and then 2 to 4 when it was 3 to 4 in heroic. Anima Web is now going to do 20% less damage for raids with fewer than 30 players. Anima Web, the beam minigame where you have to get to the orbs. Shared Suffering now does up to 20% less damage for raids with 10 players on normal and heroic difficulty. And then the base health of the ads, the Conjure Manifestation and the Harned Spectre, is now lower for raids with fewer than 30 players. Again, this is another fix to raid sizes. Sludgefist also got changed. Chain Slam used to not scale correctly with the group size, so the amount of damage you were supposed to be basically soaking wasn't scaling properly. And on top of not scaling properly, Chain Slam damage has been reduced by 35%, depending on group size in heroic. And lastly, Colossal Roar, again, reduced damage by 20% depending on the raid size. Interesting changes. I don't think too many of these were needed, but we've gone through quite a few videos where we talked about the participation of guilds in heroic, and how heroic had been a little bit slower than the other expansions. But Blizzard did, pull through quite a few nerfs already to the raid in its entirety. And now we were getting to the point where the numbers started to look pretty healthy. We have gotten to 20,000 plus guilds clearing at least over half the raid, and we are approaching 10,000 kills on the Nathrius in heroic, so it did look pretty fine from that end. The last boss being changed is Stone Legion Generals. This one, though, also is going to get changes for Mythic. So again, they changed the scaling, the damage being decreased by up to 25% for 10-player raids, but also increased by 10% more damage for 30-player raids. Similarly, damage increased by 33% for 10-player raids and increased by 17% for 30-player raids in heroic. When it comes to normal and heroic difficulty, Heartrend now targets 1 to 3 players, scaling from 10 to 30 player raid sizes, and then you have Seismic Upheaval, which targets 4 to 10 players, again based on the raid size, together with Wicked Laceration, which damage is now going to scale with the number of players. The actual Mythic changes are the Goliath and the Skirmisher. The Goliath is going to have 11.1% less HP, and the Stone Legion Skirmisher is going to have 10% less HP in Mythic, just Mythic. The other boss being changed in heroic only, normal, heroic, and LFR, is the Nathrius. The Kabbalists, so the ads in the second phase, and I guess last phase if you get them alive to that point, their health is reduced by 10%. So many changes regarding scaling, regarding raid size for normal and heroic, and only one relevant Mythic change, which is going to be the HP of the ads on Stone Legion, which is pretty relevant, particularly the Goliath change. So we have gotten also some PvP changes. Of course, me being a PvP master, I couldn't just let this go. Now, amongst the complaints of people annoyed that specs like Retribution and Windwalker have been untouched, we do have some changes. So Unholy has gotten a buff. Now, my data is telling me that Unholy is pretty bad, and whoever is playing PvP as a DK is playing Frost. So this change, I don't know how long it's gonna go for making people play Unholy. Necrotic Strike is now absorbing up to 6% of the target's HP instead of 4%, and Virulent Plague no longer has the 10% damage reduction when engaged in PvP. Seems pretty mild, particularly considering Virulent Plague not really that big of a deal. Hunters, Marksmanship, and Beast Mastery both have gotten changed. Beast Mastery has gotten its Bestial Wrath back to PvE levels. The effectiveness of Bestial Wrath is no longer reduced by 20% when engaged in combat with enemy players, and Careful Aim now deals 35% bonus damage when engaged in combat with enemy players when it was 20%. It was reduced for PvP. It still is reduced by quite a bit, but at least not as much as before. Mages are the bigger change, of course. We did get some general change to Dampening Magic. The damage over time effect reduction of Dampening Magic has gone down to 10% when it used to be 20%. And Frost also has gotten buffs, of course, because everyone is playing Fire, much like everyone is playing Frost for DK, and Unholy got the buffs. Frost Mage is also getting buffs. Glacial Spike, the damage is no longer reduced by 20% when engaged in PvP. And Ray of Frost, the damage is no longer reduced by 15% when engaged in PvP. You know, I guess as it often happens, Blizzard took the bigger hits of a spec, in the case of Frost were the talents, Glacial Spike and Ray of Frost, and said, okay, this can cause some one-shots, you know, some globaling in PvP, so tentatively we are going to reduce the damage they do in PvP to avoid some big hits, much like Marksmanship Hunter with Careful Aim for the big hit when the target is above 70% HP, so they were just reducing it to be safe. Turns out these specs are not really performing that well in PvP anyways, so let's try removing these limiters, you know, removing these limitations we put on the specs. At the same time, Fire Mage was nerfed as well. Pyrokinesis, reducing the combustion cooldown from 5 seconds down to 3. So your do nothing and fuck around until you get all your cooldowns back and try to one-shot the enemy has become a little bit longer in its periods of downtime, because now your pyrokinesis is going to take more time to get your combustion back off cooldown. Mistweaver has also gotten buffed. Mistweaver has gotten Chrysalis, the PvP talent that reduces Life Cocoon's cooldown, went up in cooldown reduction to 40 seconds. It used to be 25. And then a big change, at least when it comes to healers, of course, is that mana regeneration has gone up by 20% when engaged in PvP. The bigger change, though, when it comes to healers has, of course, to do with Holy Paladin. Damage transferred through Ultimate Sacrifice is no longer affected by Blessing of Sacrifice rank 2. So the default Blessing of Sacrifice is that the target takes 30% less damage taken, but you take 100% of the damage that gets prevented. So you make the target take less damage, and in exchange, you are the ones who take the damage. But now, Ultimate Sacrifice is going to ignore the rank 2 of Blessing of Sacrifice. The rank 2 of Blessing of Sacrifice reduces the damage you take from Blessing of Sacrifice by an additional 25%. So now, it's going to be riskier for you as a paladin to use Blessing of Sacrifice with Ultimate Sacrifice. You don't have the safety net of an extra damage reduction when you use it. But, of course, the bigger change is that the mana regeneration is decreased by 30% when engaged in PvP. This was the bigger problem, of course, when it comes to Holy Paladins. In arenas, they used to last forever because of their mana regeneration, rather their free mana, their free casts. So it was just a case less so about the power of things like Ultimate Sacrifice and more so things like being able to just last longer than other healers. So this attempts to put them back in line with the rest of the healers. I'm sure this is not going to fix anything. People will still complain about many specs being not nerfed as usual. I've already seen people crying. Ret, Windwalker, Enhancement Shaman. I've even seen complaints about Arms Warriors as well. So this is going to continue. But I do think these nerfs are fine. And the buffs as well. Particularly the buffs to the specs that are underperforming. So with this we have covered all the changes for this week. We will go over the next week when it comes to Mythic Plus and when it comes to the raiding progression, because I want to make some sort of a roundup of the current progression of raiding, because the numbers are interesting. And if you come in here, you know you have to look at some numbers. Now, interesting, the changes they applied to raids, most of them being heroic and normal. Was there any need to further nerf heroic and normal? Who knows? I don't think so particularly, but clearly they had some worries about the raid sizes and the difficulty in raid sizes of normal and heroic. For dungeons, particularly happy for the change to Zayexa and to Akar, since they were the two more. It felt like a little bit harder than they should have in the other side. Rest of the changes for dungeons, I didn't mind any of the changes, any of the difficulty before from Ventunax to Naltor in Necrotic Wake. PvP, well, I will let you decide. There is no saving that. People are gonna complain either way. So with this, I'm gonna call it a day. I'm gonna leave you here complaining, I guess, because your spec didn't get buffed, or your nemesis, most hated spec in PvP didn't get nerfed. Don't take it up with me. I don't care. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, I have to go and actually buy a new oven